The relationship then between mindfulness and ethics in that tradition, a lot of times when we think of mindfulness or practicing mindfulness, it's like being present or how we pay attention or the quality of focus. But in the Buddhist tradition, at least in the tradition I was studying under, there's also a discerning quality to the attention that we're bringing to our experience. So it sort of flavors the background of our awareness where we're assessing, in this moment, is this experience wholesome or unwholesome? So if a thought arises such as like, I'm the best damn meditator in this entire monastery, right? Is that wholesome or unwholesome? Where wholesome might be evaluated as leading to compassion, less ego, oneness, connection, love, and unwholesome might be leading to attachment, greed, desire. And so this having that lens through which we're experiencing our experience over time allows us to see, like, okay, in this moment there is a sense of ease, and what would it be like to stay more in this sense of ease? In this moment, this thought is arising, and it's actually creating tension. It's not wholesome. It's making me more self-centered than less self-centered. And there are all these different ways to work with those thoughts as they arise to lead to more wholesome states of mind. So there is an inherent ethical flavor to the mindfulness itself in that tradition. Yeah.
So would you say that in Buddhism, ethics are sort of a means rather than an end, in the sense that the ethical component exists specifically to aid in the sort of awakening process or the process of spiritual maturation?
Yeah, I think that requires a dissection of what the end point actually is, right? So if we see the end point as wisdom or awakening, what actually is that? Is that the understanding that, one conceptualization of it is that it's the understanding that we're all connected, that we're all one. And so if that's the standard that we're holding, if I hurt you, I'm also hurting myself. Yeah, I'm tempted. I haven't meditated. So in a less developed mind or a less spiritually mature mind, I could get away with that and not actually feel the pain or the suffering that would create. As my mind matures and I can dwell more in compassion and ease and less ego, I will actually feel the tension that is created when I cause you harm, because there's less of a separation. And if we haven't touched into that egoless space in practice or in life in general, it's kind of a hard thing to understand. But where the practice takes us ultimately is this much deeper connection. So all of that to say that the commitment to morality, yes, it's a means to an end, but it's also embodying that end in the moment that you take on the perspective of I'm going to do no harm. And that immediately connects you with others and the goodness of people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Yeah, Mark.
So one thing I kind of like to do on this panel is challenge the idea, because I'm personally not convinced myself that moral development and spiritual development are on the same train track. And I think anytime you have this conversation, it's a requirement to bring up, so I might as well be the one who brings it up, the litany of spiritual leaders who have abused followers, had drug problems, alcohol problems, done all sorts of heinous shit. Oh, sorry, it's a family thing.
It was a family thing.
I made it about 8 minutes. So that begs the question: if we do really, take somebody like Chagram Trungpa, like if we believe that he did have some sort of spiritual enlightenment state of consciousness, yet he was an alcoholic and physically and sexually abused many of his followers. How do we square that? How do we circle that? Square that circle.
Yeah.
Triangle that thing.
So, can I say a couple things?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say, let's open that up,
Yeah.
because I think that's a really important question, because there's no denying that people in very high positions of spiritual authority have done some very awful things, and often to people who loved and trusted them,
Yeah.
and saw them as authorities. So, what do we take away from that? Should that cast doubt on the ability of mindfulness practice, or even spiritual practice as a whole, to sort of refine, who you are ethically? So yeah, go on.
I'd like to add to that, I think that's where the crucial point of where mindfulness comes in, right? Is that you have such a set of tools and you're so in deep relationship with yourself that you can recognize and feel out these type of predators, right? That you're so aware of what you're in relationship to in your experience, but something's off here. I don't think I'm supposed to be following that. I don't think I'm supposed to be a part of that, right? I agree very much with everything you said, but the one piece I think that we should bring up too is that mindfulness creates a pause for choice, right? A great sense of discernment, right? Are you aware of what you're aware of? So you have a choice at any given moment to say, do I want to make choice A or do I want to make choice B? And once you become aware of yourself and how you're experiencing your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, and how you're participating in the present moment awareness. And what I'm hearing us say is like, that's a very real thing. We can talk about materialism and consumerism and how that, someone's like, oh, that's the new thing. And mindfulness is having its moment right now.
Mm-hmm.
And we could say like, how do I get in on that? How do I make that my new brand and that my new business and make money off of that? And we could bring in that that's happened in how many other industries, right? So this isn't new, this predator, horrible people taking something and running with it for their personal gain is not new. Right? It happens in spirituality and mindfulness and everything. But that's why these tools are so important to the individual person, so they can say, I don't think I'm going to buy into that.
I think there's another way in for me when I think about teaching mindful leadership is I like to look at exactly what Mark was talking about, which is what is it that in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of a very intense situation, creates a situation where people would make a choice that they otherwise would not make.
Okay.
And so when just to put my legal hat on, one of the most painful things that I had to do in almost 28 years that I was in that senior executive position was when I was asked to be in charge of investigations of people who otherwise we knew to be good people, bright minds, good hearts, but they had done something that either violated GAAP or violated a company policy or potentially did something that was illegal, and I was charged with investigating it. And in a small handful of times that I had to do that, thankfully, it was a very small number of times, but to a person, every time I did that, when I was sitting across the desk from someone and they would say something like, I don't know what happened in that moment. It's not me. I know better than that. That isn't what I would have done. And it was the impetus for creating a part of the mindful leadership curriculum that we teach at the Institute that is all about asking and reflecting upon what are my personal leadership principles. Not what somebody told you in a book, not what your company told you in a book, not what somebody else told you, but what is it for you? What is it? And we spend quite a lot of time on that reflection of what are my personal principles? How close can I get to them? We work with it in a number of different ways using reflection because at the end of the day, I know from all those years in the corporate world that if you work long enough, you will find yourself in a position of gray. And when you're in that position of gray, you need to know, close up, what are my principles? What's there for me at the core? So part of the motivation for me was I knew leaders, the best leaders, to be people with bright minds and warm hearts who get overwhelmed and who get put into pressure cookers and who find themselves in the midst of the chaos where they don't have the ability to take that pause, to touch into those principles. And the question that we teach to ask is, what's called for now? What's called for now? And that takes a discipline, and it doesn't get solved by an app and 5 minutes of practice. You need to do much more than that.
You just haven't found the right app yet.
There you go.
Can I say something?
Yes,
about
absolutely.
So this idea of morality developing with spiritual practice, I actually agree with you. I don't think there's a direct correlation. And I think your argument around these great spiritual leaders that fall from grace or sleeping with their students, I think there's three ways to look at it. One, we could just say they're not spiritually developed, they're not actually enlightened, they're narcissistic, and they just gained all of this power. And there are lots of examples of the truth of that. I would actually argue that Chogyam Rinpoche, this guy that you referenced, does have deep wisdom on a similar level as I would hold my teacher in Burma, Sayadaw U Pandita. However, there's this great teacher, academic, spiritual master, Ken Wilber, who talks about there are two parallel paths. There's waking up and then there's growing up. And the two don't necessarily mature side by side. So waking up is more like this wisdom that can get developed as you sit and you focus on your breath and you observe the nature of a thought and an emotion and cessation, and you see that everything is impermanent, and because it's impermanent, you don't have to take it so seriously, because there's freedom around that, and then the mind starts to awaken and get liberated, and there's a deep peace that comes from that. But that's not necessarily teaching you how to be in relationship to John and care about his needs. I might feel more connected with him, but there's not necessarily a maturation and emotional regulation and ability to hold anger and respond skillfully through anger. That can develop with personality and in relationship to other people and just being a human being in the world. And it's why you can get these monks that go into caves for tens of years, but you never go to them for relationship advice. And
It's
so,
always interesting when people ask the Dalai Lama for advice about their relationships or their marriage or something.
yeah.
It's a monk.
Yeah, and so and they have something to offer, but the nuances of all of that, how to be in the thick of it, not so much. So the second thing I'd say around that is just that we can wake up and not necessarily grow up. And even if our enlightenment is here, it's still expressing itself through a body and through a brain and through an ego that's going to have certain defilements that need to be developed in other ways. And then the third thing I say, if he is actually enlightened, is that maybe enlightenment isn't just this thing that we hit and then we're there, but it's something that we're vacillating between, like, oh, I'm in an enlightened state right now, and I'm not. I am and I'm not. And